we're streaming, so I'm going to make sure we're all set before I start. Okay, good evening, everybody. Oh, I love it. I'm Marilyn Lorenz, and I am the program coordinator of the Interfaith Committee on Latin America, and we are very pleased to be collaborating with the Latin America Caribbean Committee of the Loretto community and Cross-Border Network in Kansas City. The mission of the Interfaith Committee on Latin America, or IFCLA, is to accompany the people of Latin America in their struggles for human rights and social justice, and to do that through education and advocacy here in the United States. So tonight we're going to hear some disturbing things. Most of you are aware, maybe everybody's aware, that there was a coup in Honduras in 2009. And people have been going frequently since then to monitor the human rights situation. And that's what our friends did last May. It's really important, as you know, that we know what our government is doing so that we as citizens can respond. This is one of the things that IFCLA does. We try to have monthly events, either dinners or events like this, on various countries so we can keep up to date. The next one will be on October 22nd, and that will be on my trip to Juarez and El Salvador. Mary Jane Schutzius and I are going down because it's the 25th anniversary of the repopulation, and some of you were, Angie, yeah, you were part of all of that stuff back in the day. Nancy Whitwer went, Marianne McAvoy, a bunch of people from your community went, and of course, Carol, sitting right there, who's not part of the Loretto community, but part of IFCLA. Anyway, and so we've been down. Kathy Wright's gone down with me with the kids. So I'm going to go down, and we'll talk about that on October 22nd. November 7th through 9th, we will be looking at extractive industries. And we'll have two people from El Salvador, a priest and a brother, who are sponsored by Oxfam, who will be here mostly at the universities. We're going to have an interfaith breakfast at Central Reform Congregation on Thursday morning at 8:30. Your name is on that list. You will get an invitation. If you would like to have a meeting for a group that you have, let me know, and you know how to get a hold of us, I think, ifcla at ifcla.net. And we will be looking not only at mining in El Salvador, but we're looking at Peabody Coal, and West Virginia, and Colombia, and Guatemala, and all the places that all of this stuff is going on, and realizing that it's an international, global issue that we need to be looking at. Finally, when you hear about the people involved in the coup and the human rights violations in Honduras, you discover that some of those actors were trained at the infamous School of Americas, now called the Western Hemisphere for Security and Cooperation. We will be taking the bus down to Georgia again in November 16th. And you know, we have lots of rooms, so if you can't do the bus thing, you'd prefer to drive during the day, which is what I do now, much more pleasant. Drive down a day early, and then we have the rooms, and you can be part of it and drive yourself home during the day rather than the all-night thing. So if you want to go, let me know. I think it's really important that we're going to be there over the actual dates of the anniversary of the killing of the Jesuits. So enough of that. Alice Kitchen is now going to invite and introduce our speakers and bring them here to the podium. So thank you for coming, and I'll say a little goodbye at the end.
Hello, and we're delighted to be here. The Cross-Border Network really appreciates the co-sponsors that we have that are here, and for all of those Lorettos that are out there across the country. Hello, we're glad that you're joining us tonight, and we would encourage those of you in the audience to move up a little closer so we can have more communication and we can see and hear you better. The panel tonight, we have three of us who travel to Honduras, and we will present different parts of our information for you, and we'll have questions and answers afterwards. Melissa Styler is here to my far right. She is a student at Penn Valley Community College in economics. She's a labor union organizer and activist in the Kansas City community, and in particular in the gay and lesbian area, and also longtime activist with the one-year anniversary of Occupy movement. Judy Ansell, next to her. Also to my right is the chair of the Cross-Border Network in Kansas City. She's the director of the UMKC Labor Studies program. It's part of UMKC Department of Economics. She's a longtime labor organizer, active in the international global solidarity community. She is the facilitator for the Heartland Labor Forum on our alternative community radio, and that is KKFI. She and Marilyn are both Mary Rhodes honorees, and for us Lorettos, that is one of the most esteemed honors that a Loretto can receive, and it's for women who have made major changes. Myself, I'm Alice Kitchen, and I'm a co-member of Loretto from Kansas City, a retired social worker, community activist, co-chair of the Affordable Care Act Committee in Kansas City, and a member of our Loretto Latin American Caribbean Committee. So we will proceed from there, and towards the end we'll do questions and answers from the stage.
Hi, everybody. I suppose before we go on to tell you what we actually did during the delegation, I should tell you what the delegation was all about. We're all members of the Cross-Border Network. We were there representing the Cross-Border Network, but the delegation was also made up of academics, human rights, and labor activists, students, Canadians, and U.S. citizens. Many of the delegates had extensive experience in Honduras. Judy, Alice, and a few of the other delegates had actually been there in August of 2009, 2 months after the military coup, which had unseated popular President Manuel Zelaya, and some of the delegates are actually still in Honduras today. It was organized by U.S. and Canadian-based human rights groups, Rights Action and Alliance for Global Justice, with participation, of course, from the Cross-Border Network. We were in Honduras from May 19th to the 28th of 2012. The purpose of the delegation was to document the extreme violations against Hondurans' human rights by private military, the Honduran, United States, and other governments, then to bring our findings back to our home nations and share this information and hopefully inspire people like you to join us in demanding that our government no longer support the corrupt and illegitimate government of Honduras and the culture of impunity we find amongst the Honduran elite. Just a week before our arrival, the U.S. DEA was involved in a botched drug interdiction in eastern Honduras. So we changed our itinerary to go and investigate this. This map shows where we went. We began in San Pedro Sula, where we traveled to the Aguan Valley to visit many campesino organizations to witness the violent oppression they faced due to land conflict. We then went to La Ceiba so we could fly into Puerto Lempira and then take a boat to Aguas. The community of Aguas is in the department of Gracias a Dios in a region known as La Mosquitia, located in eastern Honduras. During this visit, we documented testimonies of the community members regarding the massacre that involved the DEA, which occurred on May 11th, 2012, and met with a number of indigenous rights organizations. After, we returned to the northwestern region of Honduras to meet with a number of worker advocacy groups, specifically addressing the plight of maquiladora workers and union members. We then made our way to Tegucigalpa, where we met with a number of activists regarding the National Front of Popular Resistance, the model or charter cities being developed to promote so-called economic recovery, and the dramatic increase of hate crimes and assassinations against the LGBT community, and the continued fight against impunity by the people of Honduras and the organization COFADE. Honduras has about 8 million people in it. It is the world's 13th poorest country, with 65% of the total population living below the poverty line. 18% live on less than $1.25 a day. It's the classic banana republic, which for years was dominated by United Fruit Company, which is now Chiquita Banana. Peasant agriculture and export crops were the basis of the economy, and now in the era of so-called free trade development and the new employment has centered around palm oil and maquiladoras, primarily producing apparel that is centered around the San Pedro Sula El Progreso area. The current president is Porfirio Pepe Lobo, who was elected in a cloud of repression after the coup. Now, we'll specifically be focusing on Awas today, and I want to be clear how remote this region is. This picture was taken during our hour-and-a-half plane ride from La Ceiba to Puerto Lempira, because the entire region has no roads that lead to it. The only way to get there is by plane or by the rivers that you see under the wing here. Those rivers are considered the highways by the population who lives in this region. The entire region is either jungle or savanna. Its people are largely indigenous, Miskitu, Tawaka, Pek, as well as Garifnia, who are a mix of African and Native American. We landed in Puerto Lempira and on a large lagoon, and we took a motorboat to Awas. Here's a picture of our boat ride through the jungle into Awas. La Mosquitia is extremely rural with nearly no infrastructure. They rely on rainwater. They have extremely limited electricity, which is all powered by generators, most of which community members don't have. And the communities rely on farming and dangerous deep-sea shellfish diving for work.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Judy, and it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank IFCLA and the Loretto community for inviting us to come here. What we're going to tell you is a bit of a he said, she said kind of drama involving the massacre of 4 indigenous people and the serious wounding of 3. 4 people were wounded, 3 of them seriously. And we want to start by showing you a video, and I'm actually, let's see, can you hit escape? Oh, well, we'll see how, I don't have a, you need to hit escape on the computer, and then take it, oh, Melissa, can you do it? I already opened up the video, can you find it? There we go.
La Mosquitia, the Mosquito Coast. This part of Honduras is largely ungoverned, sparsely populated, and heavily militarized.
We're on our way to Aguas. It's in one of the most remote parts of Honduras. To get there, we have to take this boat ride, and this is really the main way that people in this part of the country get around and travel.
We've come here because the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency, or DEA, is active in this region, thousands of kilometers from U.S. soil, fighting the so-called war on drugs. We've just found out that one of the operations that they were involved in has left several civilians dead.
Yo estaba gritando, llamando a Dios. Ahí estaba un montón de militares ahí en el landín. Y cuando yo salí me puso con el arma y dice, va a matarme. Yo no me maté, le dije, yo mataste a mi hijo. No me mates. Mi hijo metió una bolsa, pero así lo llevó mi hijo.
The U.S. says 80% of all planes smuggling cocaine out of South America first land in Honduras. Many of those shipments are then transported north to satisfy the demand of the world's largest cocaine consumer, the United States.
En los últimos años se ha incrementado, y eso debido a que en la región muchos países han tomado medidas estrictas, por ejemplo en México, mismo Guatemala, República Dominicana, además de que la geografía, el terreno, le ofrece muchas ventajas a esta actividad.
Fault Lines obtained this U.S. surveillance video, which according to the DEA is part of a classified operation. Shot in August 2011, we were told it shows drug traffickers unloading bales of cocaine from an aircraft. A similar scenario was playing out on May 11th of this year. American officials received intelligence that a flight had left Colombia destined for the Mosquitia. A DEA team stationed nearby flew in U.S. helicopters to intercept the shipment as the cargo was being moved onto boats. Hilda Lezema was on the water that night. She was returning on a 7-hour journey down the Patuca River after dropping off fishermen to work in the open sea. As she neared Aguas, she said she heard the U.S. helicopters.
Dio la vuelta, vino otro, dio la vuelta, vino otro, otra vez dio la vuelta. Después vino otra vez bajando, abajito.
Hilda says that one of the helicopters then opened fire without warning at the wrong boat. Bullets tore through both of her legs. Doctors told her they'd have to amputate them if she cannot keep her wounds clean. After she was hit, she dove into the river to hide.
Agarré de un palo, estuve agarrado, escondida, tal vez si me vuelve a tirar otra vez. Ay, escondí un niñito, iba cruzando, lo estuve viendo, también estaba nadando, le pasó otro tiro del lado de la cabeza, el pobre muchachito se dobló, pero a él no lo tocó nada.
In all, 4 people were killed that night, including 2 pregnant women. We counted 18 holes where bullets had pierced the boat. The helicopters did land to confiscate the drugs, but no one on board offered the victims any medical assistance. U.S. officials dispute Hilda's version of events. They claim that someone in her boat fired on the agents first, and the helicopter returned fire in self-defense. The DEA completed an internal investigation into the incident but refused to provide fault lines with a copy. The State Department declined to share the surveillance video from that night. Was it an American operation?
I would say there's no way we would describe it as an American operation. What we have is a request for assistance. We have helicopters that are owned by the State Department, that were flown by Guatemalan pilots, that are manned by Honduran vetted police, and that had U.S. DEA operatives on them as advisors. And so what we have there is really a success. We have a success in international cooperation that we have never seen before on the Isthmus of Central America.
So we have a situation where the helicopter is owned by the State Department, U.S. officials from the DEA on board in the capacity of advising and previously training, and 4 people who were killed. But you call it a success and not an American operation.
Well, no, I think I've been very clear. We are there at the behest and request of the Honduran government. They are working in collaboration with their Central American allies, and we are working with them in an advisory capacity.
Colonel Ronald Rivera is the commander of the Honduran military in the Mosquitia region. He carried out a preliminary investigation which concluded that the helicopter mistook the villagers for drug traffickers.
Creo que sí se podría seguir trabajando con los norteamericanos en nuestro país. Es cuestión de dialogar con la gente, de hacerle saber a la gente que no fue algo intencional, que fue un accidente. Pues hacerse responsable también porque hay personas dañadas, hay personas que perdieron familia. Yo creo que traería un alivio a la población.
But the U.S. isn't taking responsibility. It says that because it was a Honduran operation, the Honduran government should carry out an in-depth investigation. The results of that are still pending. While the U.S. has built numerous bases in and around the Mosquitia, and
Right there. Okay. All right, keep in mind his words. We were there at the behest of the Honduran government. We'll examine that a little later. When we were only there for a day and a half, and in that day and a half, we did an investigation which included interviewing victims and witnesses to it. This landing is called Papatalaya Landing, and the boats that they use are called pipantes. And we saw that boat that was in the video. We counted 19 bullet holes, one more than Al Jazeera did. What was so noticeable to us was that the boat was not secured at all. It was available for anybody to look at. As evidence, if they were going to do an investigation, it seemed to us that they should have secured the boat. The boat itself could have provided evidence about the direction of that the bullets came from, as well as an allegation which they said, which was that there was firing coming from the boats, and perhaps there was ballistic evidence on the boats, but nothing was secured. None of the witnesses that we talked to had been interviewed by the authorities. The bodies of the dead were buried and had not been autopsied. The investigations that have been done, and we'll talk about several of them, as far as the official investigations are concerned, they're all classified, so we can't really hear or examine the ways in which they did their investigation. We talked to the mayor, Baquedaro, who told us that clandestine airstrips are all over the area, that the authorities know where they are, but they make very little effort to destroy those airstrips. We talked to Hilda in the hospital, who you saw in the video. It was her boat. It was a family business. She's the owner, her husband's the pilot, and the crew was actually 3 people, the 2 of them, plus their son-in-law, Emerson Martinez. Emerson didn't survive the raid. There were 13 passengers on the boat. Then we talked to her husband, Melanio, who was the pilot of the boat. And I'm going to read to you some of his some of what a later investigation by folks that we're associated with from Rights Action went and did. And what Melanio said was that he was piloting the boat along the right side of the river going upstream, as is the custom. And as they approached the landing, he crossed the river in order to prepare to land because the landing is on the left side of the river. He said it was then that he began hearing the helicopters in the air. After he crossed the river, Melanio said that he witnessed a pipante, one of those boats, on his right side floating downstream. And he came within 12 to 15 meters of it. He said most of the other passengers in the boat were sleeping because it was 2 o'clock in the morning. And he said that and nobody else that was on the boat that these folks interviewed said that they saw this other small boat. The surviving passengers, however, report that they were awakened by the noise from the helicopters. Candelaria Trapp, one of the people who did not survive that night, called her sister, Heraldina, shortly after 2 a.m., stating that she was almost at the Papatalaya landing because she saw the town's cell tower, so she knew that her cell phone would work. But she expressed anxiety about the 4 helicopters flying low over the boat. Heraldina, her sister, reported hearing the noise of the helicopters over the phone. Melanio says that a few minutes after seeing the unmanned boat drift by, when his boat was approximately 20 to 30 meters from the landing, the helicopters opened fire on them. And according to surviving passengers, this occurred at approximately 2:30. The passengers he spoke, these folks spoke with, told them that they heard the sound of gunfire besides that, that they heard no sound of gunfire besides that of the automatic gunfire that they believe came from the mounted gun on one of the helicopters. Following the gunshots, most of the passengers jumped into the water. The boat was relatively close to the shore, and so they were able to swim to shore. A bullet pierced the motor, and that's when Melanio, who was also grazed by a bullet on his arm, jumped into the water and then swam around and guided the boat towards the shore. We spoke with Clara Wood, who you saw in the video, crying because she lost her 14-year-old son. She was the first one to reach the landing after diving into the water, and immediately a soldier put his pointed his gun at her head and held her there, right there on the landing. And she begged them to help her find her son, but nobody would do anything. We then, later on, we went to La Ceiba, where we interviewed Lucio Adan Nelson, one of the people who was shot, age 23, in the hospital. His uncle had to sell livestock in order to afford to accompany him to the hospital. Lucio's a farmer. He had gone to Barra Patuca, which is at the mouth of the river on the Caribbean, in order to visit his mother for Mother's Day and to buy rice seed. He was shot through the arm and the lower back. He will be out of work for a long time and may never completely recover. And we talked to Hilder Olopio Lasama, who is the son of Hilda and Melanio. Hilder was at home asleep, and he got a phone call saying that his mother was in the river. And he and his sister jumped on our motorbike, and they raced down to the landing. But they were intercepted by agents who he described as tall, white, and speaking lousy Spanish. They pointed their guns at them and made them sit on the steps of a house. Hilder begged them to let him go look for his mother, but they wouldn't allow it. After some time, the agents came and asked him if he knew where they could get any gasoline, and then they hit him on the chest with the gun. He told them that there was gasoline at a small store nearby, and they made him take them there. They broke down the door of the store and took the gasoline. The owner came out and they handcuffed him. He was an old man. He said, "I have a heart condition." They made him lie face down on the dirt, handcuffed for several hours. They then broke down the door, kicked in the door of another store looking for some kind of hose, and finally took Hilder, hitting him again, down to the water and told him to get a boat and help them go out into the river in order to rescue this boat that was floating loose. And it turns out that that boat was the boat that the narco traffickers had put cocaine on that had come in on the airplane, but they had been interrupted by the helicopters. And so they all ran in the jungle and pushed the boat out into the water. It had 500 kilograms of cocaine on it. And Hilder was forced to take them out to that boat, where they unloaded the cocaine and put it onto Hilder's boat and took it back to the landing, where they then put it on the helicopters. During this entire time, which actually took a couple of hours, nobody was permitted to go look for the injured or any survivors in the river. Hilder said that the agents in the boat, there were two agents in tan camouflage that he had identified as white gringos. Only after all of this was done and the helicopters had departed was Hilder allowed to go look for his mother. He got in a boat, and he rather quickly found the body of his brother-in-law, Emerson Martinez, and of Candelaria Trapp. They took those bodies back, and they went and looked further, and he found his mother clinging to the weeds on the side of the river, and they took her back. The next day, they found Juana's body, and it was another day before they found Clara's son in the river. So that's the version that we gathered, and that those who followed us in doing investigations gathered from the witnesses and the victims. The question is, what about the official investigations? And Melissa's going to continue with that.
Now, there has been some media about this, and of course the U.S. has come out with many statements about the happenings of this night, none of which really adds up to what Judy's just shared with you or what any of the reports have come out with. Our group actually published a brief report of our investigation, and then Karen Spring, Annie Bird from Rights Action, and Alexander Main from the Center of Economic and Policy Research went back to the Mesquitia and took extensive interviews. They published a report last month called Collateral Damage of a Drug War, the May 11th killing in Aguas and the impact of the U.S. war on drugs in La Mesquitia, Honduras. There's a link to it and the summary findings and recommendations in your handout. COFADE, the Honduran Human Rights Organization, also did an investigation with recommendations to the Honduran government, where I believe there's a link in your handout for that as well. So what is the U.S. saying about all of this? State Department spokesperson Victoria Nuland and Ambassador Lisa Kubicki both confirmed that it was going to be up to the Honduran police to investigate the incident, but they later stated that the U.S. was also investigating. We've heard that the Honduran report is done, but of course they're not making that public. Victoria Nuland was asked exactly what the State Department's role in this incident was. She, of course, said, just like many other U.S. officials before her, that the U.S. DEA was involved only in a supportive role and they did not use force. No U.S. personnel fired any weapons. They were involved purely in supporting and advising. The questioner responded, does this mean that they advised them to open fire on a canoe carrying civilians with a pregnant woman? And did they say, hey, this looks like a good target, shoot it? To which she replied that the Honduran investigation will discover what exactly happened and that those types of questions should be directed at the DEA. Well, sure, the Honduran government is investigating. But the investigation was conducted under the Chief of Police, Tiger Bonilla, who is under investigation for his crimes against human rights as an ex-death squad leader. Our government is relying on an investigation conducted by the department led by Bonilla, but has cut funding to that department that he leads because of the human rights crimes he possibly committed. We also met with the head of the DEA in Honduras, James Kenney, and a political counselor of the U.S. Embassy based in Tegucigalpa, Sylvia Ayres. Now, I'm going to describe what they had to say. Of course, Jim Kenney was the one who was leading up the DEA's work on this whole situation. So I'm going to explain their version of the story, which you can compare with what Judy said. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to refer to the officials involved in these operations, whether they're Honduran police or American DEA agent advisors or contracted pilots coming from any number of different countries as agents. And I'm going to do this because no matter who they are, they all answer to the State Department and to the DEA. So for all purposes, the Honduran vetted team are U.S. agents. Kenny calls them all his guys. They're all on his team, and they all answer to him. So, back to the story that Judy left off. The cocaine boat had been pushed onto the river to float downstream, and the 3 agents had trekked through the jungle to find it. There were 2 Honduran, according to Jim Kenney, there were 2 Honduran agents and 1 American. They arrived at the cocaine-filled boat and boarded it. They started the motor and started moving back to the landing where the helicopter awaited them. But all of a sudden, the motor stopped working. Now, Mr. Kenney tells us that the only person on the boat who had any training in fixing boat motors was the American. So the American tries to fix the boat motor. Then there comes this other boat. As Kenney claims, he is 100% sure that this is the boat coming to recover the drugs. He is sure that the same traffickers who had scattered into the jungle have regrouped, acquired a boat, and are now coming to reclaim the drugs shortly after the DEA has shown up. This boat that is approaching is the boat carrying the passengers, the same boat that had children on it, pregnant women on it, elderly people on it, and according to Kenney, they are narcotics traffickers. He claims he knows this because as the boat is approaching, while the agents are yelling, "Police," to let them know who they are, the passenger boat makes a deliberate turn to ram the boat carrying the cocaine and the 3 agents. Now, I want I want you to remember the boats that we saw earlier, especially the boat with the bullet holes in it, because that was the boat involved in this incident. It's a very big boat. It would be pretty difficult to make a deliberate term, what while we were talking to him was jokingly called a menacing term, but that's exactly what Jim Kenney says that it does. So, this passenger boat rams the boat containing the cocaine, and the passengers supposedly leapt into the boat containing the cocaine and agents, and they fired at them, who have not instigated the situation in any way. Jim claims that there are about 7 to 10 people in the passenger boat, and that when the agents are fired upon, they fire back, but not the American. The U.S. wants to be very clear that the American never fired anything, as he was too busy fixing the boat motor. So, one of the agents calls for help, and a second helicopter comes and shoots the passenger boat, which then just floats away. It's DEA protocol to assist anybody who's been injured in a situation like this, but as this is being scapegoated as a Honduran mission, DEA protocol doesn't have to be followed. Furthermore, regardless of the fact that there were supposedly 2 more helicopters that had nothing to do during this entire experience, they didn't follow that passenger boat. The same boat that Kenney claimed was 100% sure that was involved in the narco trafficking, that he claims fired on his team and leapt into their boat to attack his agents. For some reason, he had no interest at that time to actually catch what he called the bad guys. All the while, at the landing, away from this firefight, Kenney claims that his agents have secured the scene. They have for only moments handcuffed 2 villagers who were on the landing, ensured that they were not traffickers, and then asked for assistance in moving the cocaine from the boat to the helicopter, which Jim says one of the villagers was more than happy to do. After they load the cocaine onto the helicopter, the incident is over and everyone can go back to their lives, supposedly. He claims that the Honduran government and the DEA are working together to investigate what actually happened and have secured all the evidence they need to do this, which is the drugs, an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, and some magazines that were in the drug boat. But the passenger boat covered in bullet holes is evidently less important than those magazines, as it is still at the landing today. They're supposedly trying to find anyone who was in the passenger boat to interrogate them about their involvement that evening. Kenney claims that they have yet to find out who these people are, regardless of the fact that many of them have made public statements, they have been involved in press conferences or videos like we showed you already, or have been stuck in hospital beds since the incident. While we were speaking with Jim Kenney, a delegate asked, "There were obviously some innocent people killed in this operation, including children, so what are you going to do to prevent this from happening again?" Jim replied, "First of all, I don't know if it's been confirmed or not. None of it has been confirmed. And a lot of it has been information. Yes, ma'am, the 14-year-old, that's a bad decision on the parent to bring people out to do things. They don't realize the repercussions they are going to have if they just go and get on this boat that doesn't have people on it." Now, I know he's stumbling over his words there, but let me make clear what Jim Kenney is saying here. He's saying that there has never been confirmation that anyone on that passenger boat had died or was injured, though the proof is undeniable. Here you see the death certificate of a pregnant woman killed during this operation. And just as the interview was ending, I asked him that perhaps these passengers had never fired on the agents, that perhaps the initial gunshots had come from the traffickers who had scattered into the jungle. And I quote his response, "It is very possible." So, who was in charge here? According to Jim Kenney, the agents, whether flying the helicopters or holding the guns, or as he says, advising, all answer to him. And I quote, he says they basically work for the DEA. Ambassador Lisa Kubicki confirmed this on July 10th when she said that in all reality, the tactical response team, the unit that Kenney calls his guys, also answer to the DEA. Now, we'll give it to Jim Kenney and the other U.S. officials who've made comments on this. There are some things that we do see similarities in. We acknowledge, obviously, that the incident took place. There were narco traffickers, there were villagers, DEA and Honduran vetted team were all involved in which shots were fired. People were killed and they were wounded. We can agree on that. The Mosquitia is riddled with airstrips used to transfer drugs bound to the U.S. I mean, it's evident. There's narco trafficking going on in the area very severely. But overall, things just don't add up. They say that the passenger boat rammed the boat, fired on the Honduran police and the DEA agent. The villagers say that they were just passengers trying to get home. They say 2 female victims were not pregnant. According to the families and a doctor, Candelaria was 5 months and Juana was 26 weeks pregnant. They say that the bullets that killed the 4 passengers were fired horizontally and not from above, and therefore could not have been fired from the helicopters. All witnesses on the boat agreed that shots came from above. They say the bullets were small caliber, typical of an M16 rifle, not that of the large caliber used on the helicopters. Again, every last person said that the bullets came from above. The DEA said that they had no idea where the boat went after the shooting and said otherwise that they would have helped, as that's the DEA's protocol. The eyewitnesses said that the passenger boat and survivors came on shore at the landing, but armed, non-Spanish speaking agents kept them and the villagers at gunpoint, refusing to aid or search for victims. Now, though there are some things that we agree with the DEA on, there are obviously a lot more things that just don't add up about these 2 stories. And I will let Judy tell you more about that.
So how many of you vote for the DEA? The real question is, what's going on in Honduras and what is behind all of this? And we have several observations that we made. One is that there's a very high level of militarization going on in Honduras, and I would add in Guatemala, under the guise of of fighting the drug wars. Awas, which was a peaceful little community up until May 11th, is now occupied. There are daily trips of these soldiers through town in order to look for who knows what. The population feels the presence of the military. But it isn't just there. The U.S. military presence, even though we don't officially acknowledge that we have any bases in Honduras, the U.S. military presence has been long-standing. In the 1980s, in order to stage the Contra Wars, we set up the major Air Force base of Soto Cano, otherwise known as Palmarola, in Honduras. And it and Aguacate became the staging areas for the war to defeat the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. But just in the last 3 years, we have set up forward operating bases, which again aren't bases, which aren't U.S. bases, where we have DEA agents and we have fast teams which are brought out of Afghanistan and out of which operate troops that are based at Soto Cano, all over the areas where this narco trafficking is going on. Not only that, but in Guatemala, there have been 3 bases set up in the last few years, and then just last month, we deployed 200 Marines in Guatemala to fight the narco wars as well. The level of militarization is palpable. You see it all over the place. Whether it's police or military, wherever you go in Honduras, there is a major security presence. This is just part of the U.S. military budget in Central America, but this is police and military aid over the last few years, which totals about $45 million. What's behind all this? Is it just the war on drugs? We don't think so. We think the war on drugs is really being used as a cover for protecting of U.S. interests, and that's why we ask the question, is Honduras where we're going to fight our next war? With all this militarization, is it going to destabilize this country? Is it going to prepare us to keep the U.S. military active looking for another war? Is it going to be there just in case Honduras goes to the other side? And there's some real reasons why we ask these questions. First off, we've done it before. As I mentioned, the Contra Wars in the 1980s. The Contra Wars were, Honduras was the major staging area. We had over 5,000 troops there. It led to a bloodbath. In Central America, over 350,000 people died in the wars in Nicaragua and Honduras and in Guatemala during this period. All you have to do is take a visit to COFADE, the human rights office in Tegucigalpa, and look at the walls. These are the youth of the 1980s who were disappeared and assassinated because of the massive repression that occurred there as a result of this militarization. And then fast forward to more recent times. In 2009, Honduras had a military coup in which the popular president, Manuel Zelaya, was overthrown by the leader of the Air Force and a number of the richest and most powerful people in the country. Why was Zelaya overthrown? Well, I guess you could, there are a lot of reasons you could speculate on. One is that he was a traitor to his class. He was a rich landowner, and yet he did things which became very popular with the poor. He raised the minimum wage, he raised teacher salaries, he moved away from the traditional friendship with the United States and moved toward Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. He joined the ALBA, the Bolivarian alternative, which Chavez had established in South America as a way of pulling countries out of the U.S. Economic domination. He called on the U.S. to legalize drugs, and he wanted to democratize the Honduran Constitution, which was notably undemocratic, a product of the 1980s. And the heads of the coup represented the oligarchs, the richest families, and their pet politicians. This was, when we went in 2009, this was a demonstration which literally showed you the heads of the coup. And a resistance movement grew. When we were there in 2009, they had just established the FNRP, the National Front of Popular Resistance. There were massive demonstrations. People marched from all over the country to participate in these demonstrations, calling for the return of Zelaya, calling for the coup to be toppled. And there was ensuing tremendous repression. We witnessed it. We saw the police. We saw police provocateurs initiate burnings and stuff like that. We saw them invade a university. We saw them beat students. We interviewed people who had been beaten, and we saw where all of the police control materials were coming from. We have Alice brought home a tear gas canister made in Pennsylvania. And the resistance has continued, and the resistance has grown in many ways. The resistance formed their own political party, which is called Libre, which means freedom. And guess who's running for president? Manuel Zelaya's wife, Xiomara Castro, and she's way ahead in the polls. Her vice presidential candidate, which was just announced, is Juan Barahona, who is a leader of the resistance and a labor leader. This is a threat to the United States. And they certainly did not really heavily object to the coup. They allowed Pepe Lobo to be installed in very dubious elections, and to have all of that progress reversed with Xiomara Castro's election next year will be a blow to U.S. foreign policy, and certainly concerning. Right now, the Obama administration is pretty friendly with Pepe Lobo, who's the president of Honduras. And as Colonel Ross Brown, an Iraq veteran and commander of Joint Task Force Bravo, which is based at Sotocano, said, by countering transnational organized crime, that's narco trafficking, we promote stability, which is necessary for external investment, economic growth, and minimizing violence. So what's the external investment? Well, first off, Honduras is part of CAFTA, the Central America Free Trade Agreement. They export, 70% of their exports go to the United States. A great deal of their foreign direct investment comes from U.S. corporations. They are major producers of palm oil, which is an energy alternative, used as an alternative to gasoline. Of course, they're the original banana republic, and Chiquita is still very prominent there, and they also have a major maquila sector. Check the label on your shirt. I bet a bunch of you have shirts made in Honduras, where, of course, the wages are low, and they like to keep it that way. Beyond that, Honduras has a lot of resources. Tremendous water resources, as you saw in the Mosquitia. The Mosquitia is the largest rainforest north of the Amazon. And right now they're privatizing rivers. Over 70 rivers in Honduras have been privatized. They're building dams, and the people are not being consulted at all in what's happening to their area. There's also major exploration for oil going on in Honduras, and they think they've found a substantial reserve of oil there. And then lurking behind it all, of course, is Hugo Chavez and the Bolivarian alternative. Honduras, in a sense, has become a laboratory for the next phase of neoliberalism, of the experiments of free market capitalism. They just passed a law called the Charter Cities Law, where they are going to start privatizing whole chunks of real estate and giving it over to foreign corporations. No constitution, no labor laws. The foreign corporation gets to decide who gets in, who gets in there, and who the workers are, and what the laws are going to be. This is reminiscent of, this was pointed out, and I thought this too, this is reminiscent of the foreign concessions in China before World War II, where the European powers took chunks of Chinese territory. It's a new form of colonialism, and I think it's a real threat to the people of Honduras, let alone the rest of us. So what's going on? Well, we see militarization in the name of the war on drugs. We see vital economic and strategic interests being pursued. And all of this is adding up to a human rights catastrophe. Berta Oliva, who is the head of COFADE, the human rights organization, said, "We know that militarization of a country inevitably leads to human rights violations. We know that from the 1980s. And terrorism and murder and repression are on the rise. We went to visit this guy in the hospital. He was shot by thugs of Miguel Facuse, the palm oil baron, who has been stealing land from poor peasants in the Aguan Valley. Repression has increased tremendously since the coup. The two major targets are journalists. 22 of them have been killed, assassinated since the coup, and the LGBT, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community has been particularly attacked, with over 80 assassinations since the coup. One of the most recent is Eric Martinez, who was killed on May 7th. So we're very concerned about Honduras. We think Honduras is a country that deserves a great deal of attention, and we're particularly concerned about the role that the U.S. is playing there. So Melissa's going to talk about one particular project while I set up the very end of this video.
Now, in your guys' packets, there is a letter that says Honduran Equality Delegation on that. A project that the Cross-Border Network and myself have taken up is that of scheduling another delegation to be part of, people in Honduras are calling for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of folks to come and witness this upcoming election, to make sure it's a legitimate election, to make sure that they can document if there are any human rights violations. And we were specifically asked to do that for the LGBT community. So we are inviting any of you, or any of you guys that you know, to apply to be a delegate on that delegation, and to accompany folks during the November 2013 general election who are LGBT activists or perhaps running for political office, to ensure their safety and also to create an international presence in the area. If you have absolutely any questions, you have our contact information on that letter. Please pass it along to whoever you know.
Está creando leyes para hundir más a los pobres de este país.
Heriberto Palacios lost his son Nahun 2 years ago. He was shot several times at close range. Nahun was a local journalist that had taken up the cause of the campesinos and reported on their struggle.
Mi hijo murió en su casa 3 cuadras de la Policía Nacional. Sin embargo, la Policía Nacional en el momento no se acercó para no agarrar ninguna evidencia. Entonces, ¿a quién nosotros podemos esperanzarnos? A nadie. Más bien cuando uno mira a la policía por ahí cerca, más bien se pone nervioso, porque ellos son los principales asesinos de este país.
Across the country, Hondurans continue to be killed with no accountability. The communities we visited in the Mosquitia are still waiting for justice.
Nosotros no necesitamos armas, no necesitamos balas, necesitamos otras cosas, que eso nos va a hacer a nosotros estar en mejores condiciones. Nos está metiendo en un ambiente de una depresión, una represión, más de lo que fue el golpe de Estado.
Following the shooting that we investigated, the DEA has been involved in 2 new incidents where an American agent directly shot and killed an alleged trafficker. In spite of all the violence, drug trafficking goes on, and people here continue to lose loved ones. Colombian former presidents, Brazilian former presidents, Mexican former presidents have all said that the war has been a failure. The US has spent billions of dollars trying to eradicate this. Countless lives have been lost in Latin America, and drugs continue to flow. At what point will you acknowledge that's an imperfect approach?
Well, I don't think there's anything perfect in this world. In
That's
reality, what we have is a foe that is highly adaptive, that is cruel. The United States does not see legalization as having worked. And while some of our allies may talk about that, that's fine. We want to hear what they have to say, and we'd like to hear what their plans are.
But you don't take any of it on board, even though it's their own people who are dying every day in the front line of this war.
This is an unfortunate fact that people die all over the world fighting the scourge of drugs.
But all too often, the people dying in Honduras are those who have not chosen to fight. The U.S. shows no signs that it will stop funding the police and the military, despite the fact that both have been linked to extrajudicial killings.
El Departamento de Estado tiene mucho que ver en toda esta inseguridad que se está generando. ¿Cuáles son los avances que tenemos? ¿A quién le conviene esta situación? ¿A dónde va la droga? ¿Quiénes están participando? Está pasando que tenemos un país militarizado, que Estados Unidos nos mandó más tropas, que Estados Unidos instaló más bases militares. Bueno, se está utilizando el narcotráfico y el crimen organizado como una excusa para continuar sometiendo a los pueblos latinoamericanos.
Okay, pull out your handout that you were given when you came in. First of all, the recommendation is to read the collateral damage report. And I don't know if you have a link that you can go to that, but if you go on Rights Action website, and Marilyn, is it on your website, the collateral action document? Okay, there's a link and we can get that. That is this document here that I have in front of me. We've referenced it throughout the presentation. It is considerable detail on the findings, and it gives you good information on how to direct your questions to your U.S. Congress people, and a good background on what happened. It is just one particular incident in Honduras that we looked at, one travesty. All of this is horrific, and the next steps on your document that you have, what you can do, there's an alert in your attachment. You can look at the different names and people to contact. We're asking our congressman, our House representative in Kansas City, Emmanuel Cleaver, who is the leader of the Black Congressional Caucus, because he suggested we do it actually, that they could put together a delegation and go down and do an investigation. So we're waiting to hear from comparable representative in Honduras legislature to make a request for the delegation to go down. But people need to go and see for themselves. Also, you should encourage your U.S. Rep. Lacey in this area to join with him and be a part of that delegation. We're asking you to contact the Senate Judiciary Committee, because they're the committee in all of Congress that is most favorable to our concerns and actions. Also, write letters to the editor of your local newspapers, ask questions wherever you go about what's going on. Did you know this was going on? We need money to pay for the medical bills. In your handout, there is information about the injuries and the medical conditions of the 7 victims that you saw in the presentation. I know our Latin American committee is looking at that, and that's important because if their country, Honduras, and our country is not going to do it, it's a basic human right to be able to have access to health care, continued health care. Some of these people, their livelihoods have been totally affected by the injuries that they have sustained. And also invite, we'll join with people going down for future delegations if you can. Get us invited to places where we can go and share this information. Now, as Judy alluded to, this is part of a bigger picture. We need to work towards military aid, our military aid to Honduras. We need to review our drug war policy. Go online and look up the website of Drug Policy Alliance, and you'll see what they're suggesting. Some notable people in Latin America, leaders, as well as in our country, Paul Volcker, et cetera, who have come out. I think a number of high-level Republican and Democrat leaders have come on and said we have to decriminalize drugs. It's become much too criminalized, filling our prisons with prisoners, and who is it benefiting? So ending the war, the drug war in Central America, and now it's going to Africa. And also with your money and your own personal commitment, join the Action Right, join the Interfaith Alliance here in St. Louis, get behind what they're doing. Support COFADE, which you heard in the presentation, is a human rights organization in Honduras where they are working for the rights of the people who have lost family members or have been disappeared. And if you go to the SOA, and I strongly recommend that you participate with SOA and go to Fort Benning in November, there should be handouts at the interfaith table there about that. And that whole effort to close down the schools is really important, because that's part of this cycle, which is that we train their military to torture people in their country, and becomes a vicious cycle. And Leavenworth in Kansas is also part of that. So these are the tips and the suggestions on the content of your letter. A sample letter is in your third page of your attachment, and then those people who serve on the different committees are listed. But we have suggested targeting your letters, and the questions are also that you should raise are on the back of the handout. So I think we're ready now to go to questions and answers, and we're going to move to the stage.
Let's give, hello, hello, good afternoon, good morning, hello. Let's give them a hand before you all get away. Okay, so the volunteers have microphones in the audience for you to ask your question. We're streaming this. It's going to be on YouTube, so tell your friends to listen and see what you just saw. So who has a question? Raise your hand. Hi, there we go. Virginia.
This is a small thing, but in the case in Aguas, the cocaine was being offloaded, and I would think normally the plane would like refuel and go on to the U.S. if the drugs are going on to the U.S. How does that work?
How do the drugs get to the U.S.?
I don't understand your question exactly.
In this case, the cocaine was being taken off of airplanes onto boats in the Aguas community.
Mm-hmm.
If those drugs are destined for the U.S., why were they being taken off the plane in Honduras?
Oh, by boat. That's how they're sent to. It's much easier to get them in by boat from that area than it is to actually fly a plane into the United States.
Okay, thanks.
They actually have submarines or very fast boats that they take them down the rivers to the Caribbean, where they transfer the drugs to submarines or very fast boats, which then take them to Mexico, and then they're brought into the U.S. from Mexico.
Okay, we got a question here, and then over to you, Carol.
Yeah, so can you explain where the drugs come from? So they're not made in, where are they made and where are they coming from? What's the path? And I've got a second question too.
Typically they're made in Colombia, though they could be made in any number of places. And then they're brought into Venezuela because coming from Colombia, if there's a plane that is thought to be carrying drugs, there's an agreement that the United States government, or the military or DEA or whoever can just shoot that plane down out of the sky, but they don't have that agreement with Venezuela. So they'll make the drugs in Colombia, move it over to Venezuela, fly it out into Honduras, and then boat it through to the U.S.
Is the bigger issue the working to take over the rivers, the oil? Is that really the bigger issue? Is that why the militarization is going on there?
We suspect that's the case. It's pretty hard to prove that. We look at the interests. We look at who's benefiting, and there's a lot of interests that benefit from the war on drugs, from the arms industry to the military interests in general. But we don't see that all of this makes sense without understanding the underlying interests and the need to keep Honduras on, quote, our side in terms of the ability for multinational corporations to go in there and extract resources and make money there in Honduras. Otherwise, why are we bothering so much with it? It seems pretty clear to us, just as the reporter asked that State Department guy, why are we continuing with a 30-year-old war on drugs, which has not stopped the drug trade at all, but has destroyed communities in Mexico and now Central America, and has led to the incarceration of tens of thousands of people in the United States. This policy is so patently a failure. Why are we continuing it? And the only thing you can understand is that there are interests that are driving it.
And when we met in Awath with the mayor, a large group of us were in his tiny little office, and one of the reporters asked the question about, has there been oil speculation in this area? And he affirmed that he had heard that there had been some. And of course, we have heard that there were over 70 rivers have been privatized.
Carol?
Who was Obama with? Who was that person that he was standing smiling with? The president?
Pepe Lobo, the president of Honduras.
Pepe Lobo,
Okay.
the president.
So then Obama and Hillary Clinton are complicit in this?
You know,
I don't know what other way to think about it. Does he not know? He must be aware.
I think first off that Obama is not particularly focused at all on Latin America. The U.S. policy now since the beginning of Bush, has really been focused on the Middle East. And Obama has a big focus on Asia. Right now, they're negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is the free trade agreement to end all free trade agreements. It will be the last one we do because it will have continuous access so anybody can join. It's modeled on NAFTA. And those are the focuses of the Obama administration. Latin America policy, unfortunately, still seems to be principally in the hands of the people who fought the Contra Wars and their descendants. And you just don't see any kind of major initiative. And it's still that kind of Cold War thinking now transferred from, Cuba isn't the only evildoer in Latin America. Now we've got Venezuela with Hugo Chavez. And it seems like all of our policy is framed in terms of the good, the evil and the good, rather than understanding the subtleties of economic development and democracy and what it really means to have to build democracy in Latin America. And I think for all of those reasons, the United States U.S. policy has taken the turn it has. We were very, very upset at the time of the coup that the United States didn't take a stronger position. We condemned the coup, but then we winked at the elections and the installation of Pepe Lobo.
And I would add that during that coup, or after that time, the State Department under Hillary Clinton was influenced by Lanny, what's his last name?
Davis,
who was part of her campaign committee. And so the politics and campaign politics in this country does have influence in the business interest on the State Department.
Lanny Davis was hired by the Honduran government to be their lobbyist right after the coup, and he had previously worked for the Clinton campaign, and those kind of insiders seem to have an influence.
So, we have a question in the back. Abby, you need a mic.
I continually get, and I'm sure most of the people in the room do, petitions to sign from Credo, and they're always asking for people to create new ones. And I'm wondering, is there anything that you would suggest in terms of something I could do personally with regard to starting such a petition? I mean, obviously, addressing something to Hillary Clinton is probably meaningless. It's, as you said, Central America is not a significant part of the administration's focus, but somewhere else along the line asking for justice around this particular event in May. I certainly don't think that the U.S. is going to change its policy around drugs, either domestically with the number of African American men we incarcerate or internationally. But in terms of an investigation and simple justice around the murders in May, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
I'll start talking about that a little bit, and then the others can comment. There have been 3 letters, dear colleague letters, out of the House of Representatives, which the Democrats in Missouri and Jerry Costello in Southern Illinois have signed. And they've resulted in Patrick Leahy holding back 20% of the military aid to Honduras. What we need is a letter from the Senate, because the word is the Senate, the State Department pays more attention to the Senate in terms of this. So Claire has been slippery, but you know, you sort of be sensitive because she's beleaguered and blah, 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 but she's always been kind of middle of the road. Blunt's not going to go on board. But I think to pressure Claire, if she makes it through November, to sign on board, I did speak with her aide, and the letter that we were trying to get them to sign wasn't saying anything more than already existed, and so he didn't see any point in signing it.
Let me add that we're still trying to get an investigation of what happened in May in the Mesquite, and the target for that is Patrick Leahy, who is chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's a senator from Vermont, and so we've been trying to target the Judiciary Committee, and you can find out who's on it just by Googling it. But it's also in your packet in an alert. At this point, it's probably getting too close to the elections for them to do anything before the elections, but we certainly hope that if there's any kind of a Senate that's controlled by Democrats after the elections, that they will pursue this, and so we want to keep the pressure on them. So that's one thing I think you can do.
And yeah, I mean, of course, I would recommend doing everything that you can to start a viral campaign if that's something that you're interested in. I would also recommend perhaps looking at some of the links, because there are already quite a few calls to actions, and perhaps just spreading those throughout your network. But yeah, I mean, of course.
So you traveled not just to Awas, but to other areas in the country, and I'm wondering, were you able to get a feel, are people welcoming the U.S. help? I mean, I lived in Honduras, and I was there during the coup, and during this time I got back last year, and a lot of my friends and family members have kind of debated, oh, we want help because we're so desperate, it's so bad, and the violence is so bad, and so they're kind of, from my sense, a lot of people are relieved that they see the U.S., not for this kind of thing that happened in May, but they're willing to sort of be forgiving because they don't trust the police because of the scandals that are going on in the police now and the extreme corruption. And everyone's nervous that the military is kind of being given, that's another thing that's going on, is that the military has been given some policing power. It's been held back a little, but it's kind of coming, and people are nervous about that as well. But I think, and I've had several debates about this, the U.S. coming in and helping, because the tension and the security is so tenuous. And I'm wondering if you got that side at anyone saying, well, we're glad that the U.S. is here. Did that come out at all, and who you were talking with, like in Progreso and other areas?
Can I get a clarification? The U.S. is in like an international presence, like we as delegates, or the U.S. is in the U.S. military?
Well, the aid. So since we are, 20% of our aid now is not going there. So I've had people say, we want that aid. And I'm like, well, we want humanitarian aid, but do we want to have aid going to police, to military? And people are saying, we want that help from the U.S. because we want the U.S. to be here to help us. That's what, and it's ambiguous because it's not clear what the U.S. is doing. That's the problem too. And Hondurans probably don't know. They're just reacting to what they hear as well. But I guess, did you hear any support for the United States being involved, is my question, from anybody that you talked to on the street?
No, but, we were on a very tight schedule, and you probably would know that better than we do because we didn't get much time to hang out. They're withholding military and police aid. I think there's so little faith in the police there because of the level of corruption that you might find people who would be in support of more training, but for the police, but we didn't encounter it.
I think that's one of the things they want. If the U.S. is giving aid, I think they're thinking the U.S. is going to come and help weed out the police or something. I mean, there's this idea that they're going to help maybe clean up the police, or, because they're nervous about the military getting that control as well. Anyway.
We have one more question up here in the front.
Melissa and I are students here at NARICS, and I just want to know, what are some ways that we can, the NARICS community, like the students, can help this and do stuff? Because, I mean, kind of like, what can the younger generation do as far, because like we can't travel, most of us can't travel down there. So what would you say we can do as students?
Well, what actions you as high school students could do?
Yeah.
That's the question?
Yeah.
Well, on your handout, there's specific letters that you can write and call your Senate and sample letters with the questions to ask. So if you don't want a canned letter, you can tailor your letter to ask those specific questions and aim your letter to Patrick Leahy and any senator, Claire in this, or whoever in the future, and but call, let them know. We've been in Claire's office numerous times. We've been in Emmanuel Cleaver's. We're not letting up. Educate your colleagues about what's going on, and provide other opportunities for the group that you belong to find out about Honduras.
Okay. I'd say do some fundraising for the victims of this.
Okay.
Try to have a fundraiser, and there's ways you can send money that is in your handout.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, furthermore, make an infographic, get involved with viral campaigns, write for your school newspaper, write letters to the editor, rally together and fundraise enough to send whoever's 18 on the LGBT election delegation next year. There's plenty of things that you can do. And if you have any questions, our contact information is on here, so you can contact us later and we can brainstorm together.
Let me just add one other thing, because I think it got skimmed over. You got a half-page handout. The organizations we're working with are trying to recruit election observers. Honduras has this weird system. The primary election and the general election are a year apart. On November 18th of this year, there's going to be a primary election, and they are asking for people to come down and be accompaniers and observers in those elections. So if anybody happens to be free for about 5 days in November and is not going to the School of the Americas, then you might think about going down there. And if not this year, we're going to be recruiting hundreds of people to go down for the general elections next year, same time. So think about doing that.
And get more of NARICS that didn't go before to go to the SOA and be educated there. Gert wants to ask a question.
Could you please say just a little bit more about the LGBT community, and in particular, why it's being targeted right up there with labor leaders and the media?
Well, what's specifically happening with the LGBT community is pretty interesting. Never before have they been given a voice like they've been given recently, and that voice has risen up through the National Front of Popular Resistance. They've been given opportunities for leadership positions. They've been given opportunities to perhaps run in this upcoming election, and time again they've been assassinated at an overwhelming rate, much more frequently than that of journalists or other types of leaders. The violence against them is just incredible, and that's just murders. As far as hate crimes and physical altercations, it's horrendous. This is a little bit of a graphic story, but I think it just makes the point very clear about what these people are facing every day. Transgendered people will be picked up by the police, they will be stripped naked, they will be raped, and they will be dropped off outside of their city to walk back to the inner city naked. And that is by the police, and that happens all the time. Not only are they being, are they victims of hate crimes, from just everyday people who are just gay bashing them, but they're being they have a target on their back because they are activists, because they are resistance leaders, but they're being specifically targeted for their gender expression or sexual orientation by the police and by the military as well. And so all of those things connected together, on top of the fact that this is the first time that they've ever been able to play a key role in an election, that they've ever been able to have even remotely, like, to be able to ask for any rights whatsoever. This is a historical time for their community, and they desperately need help, and they desperately need solidarity work within the United States, so the gay rights community can work with them down there and vice versa.
I know Carol wants to ask a question, but I want to respect the fact that we said we were going to end at 8:30. So, Carol, can you come up and ask the question personally? Yeah, so we're going to say goodbye. Thank you very much. If you want to stick around, these folks will be here for a little bit longer. We're going to go over to Weber's if you want to continue this conversation. Weber's, I think everybody knows where Weber's is. Cattywampus across the street. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you all. Great questions.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all so much.